Welcome to the Journal of Biophilic Design podcast. We're joined today by Oliver Baxter. Oliver Baxter is one of a team of three who make up the Herman Miller Insight Group. Their focus is human-centric design based on workplace research and trends. Oliver is based in Dubai, lucky him, although as he just mentioned, it's very hot there at the moment, so he hasn't been out much. Where he works in Dubai with the Herman Miller Middle East and Africa team. They explore how to bring humanity back to the workplace, and they have the concept of a living office, which I'm going to talk to you about shortly, which is a high-performing workplace that delivers an elevated experience of work for people and helps organizations achieve their strategic goals, she said, reading off the sheet of paper. So putting that aside now, Oliver, can you tell us a little bit about what Herman Miller does? Probably a lot of listeners know already about Herman Miller and stuff, but can you tell us a little bit about what you do there as well, please?
Yeah, of course. So most people are probably familiar with Herman Miller being one of the big three furniture providers in the world, specifically for like commercial furniture. But actually really behind it all, we're more of a research institute first and foremost. And then that research and insights feeds into the products that we're actually developing. So by market cap, we're actually the largest commercial furniture provider in the world. And I'm really proud and pleased to have the role of externalizing the research that we do. Now, of course, some of it is like a very closely guarded secret that I wish I could share with everybody, but it's usually to align like a new point of view or a product that we have to keep secretive. And then others of which I'm pleased to be able to take that to the market and really try and distribute as far and as wide as possible. It's not just about like reading white papers and text. We think that there should be at least a few people in the company that can talk conceptually about design and how we influence people, and maybe not so much about the product side. So I'm not actually allowed, I'm not permitted to talk about the wonderful products that we do at Herman Miller, because my focus is really just kind of being that conduit for people to the R&D at Herman Miller. So yeah, that's kind of where we are.
Okay, and your background, you're a psychologist, did I read? Or?
Yes, yeah, my background, I'm a recovering psychologist, I think you described me as. That's what I did my postgraduate studies in, and then after I completed those at Sheffield Hallam University, I went on to work in a private practice in Oslo, Norway for 3 years. And during that 3 years' time, I noticed something really interesting about the types of people that would walk in the door of our practice, and it was usually like one type of person. It was usually a lady in their mid to late 40s suffering from a very specific condition known as burnout. That was by far the most popular condition that came through. And of course, as well as the COVID situation, burnout is reaching epidemic proportions the world over as well, with around 38% of people experiencing burnout. And then if you look at the highest affected profession, which is physicians, doctors, they roughly experience 50%. So toss a coin, you're likely to get burnout if you're a doctor. Nurses, it's just a little bit below 50%. So for me, that's kind of worrying, and that's what I was passionate about. And then after I left that private practice and kind of teaching and stuff, I joined Herman Miller, a furniture manufacturer, a bit of a kind of a deviation from the career path. But I'm a typical millennial, I suppose, in that sense. And I realized that there's a lot of transferable skills there. And actually, instead of trying to rehabilitate people after dwelling within offices for 15 to 20 years, a wonderful opportunity to be preventative with the recommendations that we make at Herman Miller and the research that we conduct and then communicate out there into the market. So a lot of things that, we've been implementing for like the last 150 years is really not serving us so well for the workplaces of today. But just because we've always done it that way, people still continue to do it the same way, because there's that perspective that the office isn't broken, when I can tell you fundamentally in many, many elements, it really truly is. And we need to use the best research to inform our decisions and not just base our decisions on intuition and experience.
I mean, obviously, everything you do is human-centric, and it's human-centric research, human-centric design. obviously with your background with the psychology, and you've seen people with burnout coming in. I mean, for us, you know, we implement biophilic design. We bring views of nature in. We can see the difference, particularly it makes in healthcare, what you mentioned, you know, with doctors and patients and families and staff and everybody, you know, obviously usually in a sort of white-walled, really awful environment, not soft, not feminine if you want. But when you bring biophilic elements in, you know, better light, better air quality, natural textures, and actually the prospect, you know, that those views of nature, and we can see a, you know, a fundamental difference. I mean, do you see biophilic design in your practice? Do you see biophilic design making a difference? And obviously it's all about human-centric design, but I mean, how do you see the two overlapping?
So I'm incredibly passionate about biophilic design, and I know it's not limited to vegetation and greenery, but I'm actually, my family, 3 generations of florists.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so like I grew up around flowers, you know. I don't know if anyone knows anything about being a florist, but there are very early mornings going to the market to get the flowers and very late evenings preparing them, especially around like holidays and Valentine's Day and that sort of thing. So it's a pretty grueling job, and you're always wet and you're always cold. But when even during my undergrad studies, we would read journal articles about the benefits of vegetation, greenery, natural source of daylight, clean, fresh air, which of course has a correlation with the greenery and vegetation inside the built environment. So being that hospitals, when you're looking at reduced pain medication being required, the reduction in time spent within hospitals just from like looking out a natural window. And then you look at the commercial environment. I remember reading one study in India, and it was one of the filthiest cities for air quality in India, and they turned it into one of the best air quality facilities in the world. Now I can relate to that because I'm from Sheffield, and Sheffield for a long time was the filthiest city in Europe. And now that is 100% not the case, because it was our steel manufacturing during the Second World War that gave us that kind of accolade. But yeah, I'm a big believer in vegetation and greenery, and I ask a lot of the clients that I'm working with and conferences that I attend, you know, if you were to look, as I do, inside space and just see the lack of greenery and vegetation, and understand that there is a correlation to, you know, to being engaged and, you know, to be more creative as well. So the more greenery in the environment, there's more oxygen in the environment, because greenery obviously takes in carbon dioxide, which, you know, we all produce, some of us more than others, granted, and they expel oxygen, which is what everybody needs, you know, for our survival. But there's actually a correlation between oxygen in the blood supply and the elevated levels in our brain inspires more creativity. So what I like to remind people is that if you were working down a coal mine, you know, 100 years ago, as my grandfather was, you would quite often be given like a canary or a budgie or some sort of bird song to take down there with you. And if the air quality became no longer hospitable for supporting human life, the bird would stop singing and it would go belly up and it would die. And that would be an indicator to get, you know, out of that coal mine as quickly as possible. Now, when I look at offices, I just see like those that have included plants to like a small degree, they're kind of dead and dying. And that for me is saying exactly the same thing as that canary that was down the coal mine, is that if you can't even get your plants to survive in offices today, imagine the detrimental repercussions this is having on the human system. So I'm a very big believer in it. I'm a big believer in positioning people close to natural sources of daylight as well, near windows, which all too often they don't. Especially in this part of the world where I'm based in the Middle East and Africa, they like to put all the private offices and the meeting rooms around the periphery of the floor plate, and then everyone else on the inside. Of course, that's the wrong way around, because you don't get any natural daylight for those that are spending the vast majority of time sat at their desk, with the average office being unoccupied 77% of the time from our research, and meeting rooms again being too large and underutilized. So they become wonderful little saunas, and then the people who really need that daylight are just cut off from it. And I think there's some research that if you're positioned within 6 meters of a natural source of daylight, you will on average sleep for 45 minutes longer than someone who is positioned more than 6 meters from a natural source of daylight. So Yeah, I'm a big believer in the biophilic effect. You know, I champion it in all the presentations that I do. Not that we sell green or vegetation at Herman Miller, but like you said at the beginning, we're a holistic, humanistic company, and we have to, you know, present research that's on the periphery of our expertise as well, and not just what we're known for.
Mm. That's really interesting. As you say, you know, kind of having the offices with the main workforce being actually inside an environment and not having views of nature, not being able to see the outside space. It doesn't make sense really, but I suppose it's maybe a status thing and stuff, you know, they kind of, obviously they're getting people come in, but you can, as you say, design an office in a certain way. You can sort of shake it up a bit so that you do have the benefit for everybody. And if you think the workforce is the one that's actually generating money for you, you really want them to be in the best environment so they can do the best job they can to earn you the most amount of money, to be honest, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I look at it as like all employees in an organization. I think all too often in this part of the world, we focus on the fee earners and the senior management to lead the way in the designs that we're laying out for everybody. But for me, seniority is just another person in the sample set that I'm taking. So when I'm going into an organization, I need to get people vertically and horizontally within the organization. So horizontally, like HR, finance, IT, sales, marketing, corporate real estate, and then vertically being kind of higher, lower, medium forms of management, as well as those that are doing task of rote, so that we're getting a good sample of the organization, because that's who we need to cater for, is like the average. And, you know, we want to focus on what it is that they need. But I think those that are in the more senior positions can quite often voice what it is that they want, but wants and needs are very different. And I'm really interested in what it is that people need to do their job. And for the most part, that seems to be really lacking in workplaces today, is focusing on those needs. Whereas it's very easy to focus on those that shout the loudest and what it is that they want. So I always kind of encourage my clients just to take a step back. And of course, fee earners are important. But for me, it's about catering for everybody. And, you know, people come and go, but it's that average culture that you're looking for and what you're striving to achieve in the future as an organization, and using space as a stepping stone to get you to that culture that you want in the future. But unless you have a clear, true north statement of where you want to be in 3 to 5 years, how on earth can you plan your environment, let alone your culture, to get you to where you want to be in that 3 to 5 years future scenario?
Are you finding that people, you know, that there are more employers kind of open-minded about maybe implementing biophilic design, or maybe trying to fit their office out better to make it better for their employees? I mean, are they worried about their staff coming back? Are they worried about what the staff are feeling?
I would say no, for the most part. What I'm seeing is some knee-jerk reactions, based on, again, what makes sense and what's intuitive. But that is no longer appropriate for the workplaces of today. I never thought that I would be in a profession, you know, since I joined Herman Miller, where we would have people's lives on the line. You know, the decisions that we take are influencing people in a life and death way. And that's why it's no longer appropriate to use intuition. And no one has any experience in this anymore. Well, I mean, we have a little bit of experience because we've been playing in the healthcare environment for many, many years. We've been helping hospitals be created and designed across the world, predominantly in North America and here in the Middle East. So we've got a lot of learnings that we can apply from that, but it's no longer appropriate to use intuition. We have to use data. We have to use evidence. And the best source of evidence that we have right now is from the World Health Organization and the CDC. And then you have other organizations like OSHA, which is the Occupational Health Association, that are listening to those guys a little bit, but also making recommendations based on intuition and what makes sense. So as you mentioned, those plastic screens before, it kind of makes sense if you think about it, like division, you know, I'm not going to get sneezed on. But unfortunately, that only really counts for like the big droplets, and those are the ones that go up and then down, you know, relatively quickly. But we've since discovered that COVID-19 is aerosolized. It is present in the air for hours in smaller particles as well. So it's more about the HVAC system. And we've kind of really made reference to the fact that people in cubicles still get colds, right? Air travels above, around and under, you know, all these sorts of environments. And if you think about what the material of those screens are, it's like plastic, or maybe you've used some wood or even some metal to delineate the space and break people up and show them where they should be sat. One, it's quite isolating and lonely. But two, those are the surfaces where COVID-19 survives the most amount of time on. If you look at the materiality that doesn't support the life of COVID-19, you're looking at wool, it's about 3 hours, and then you've got cardboard around 3 to 5 hours. So if you're going to put any screen in there, then you probably want to go for the cheaper wool and cardboard options rather than spending money on expensive solutions. Now, for those of people who are listening right now, they're thinking, well, Ollie, you're selling yourself short here. You're going to not make enough money as an organization by telling people this. But at Herman Miller, we believe that we have a duty of care to first help people and then sell second. So of course we will provide screens, you know, when clients ask and request, and they do, and we've created a whole host of new ones since lockdown. But we always make it apparent the research and the fact that there is very little research to suggest that screens will prevent the spread of COVID-19. There's actually only one journal article from 1968 that was covering those face shields, and that's speaking over petri dishes. So there's just not enough research to suggest that that will have an effect. What it does do is it does increase the feelings of psychological safety. So, you know, if you can see your employer has done some COVID mitigating design factors in your workplace, then you're going to feel a little bit more comfortable being there. And therefore you can be more productive. But it's when that comfort can slip into complacency and you stop washing your hands and wearing masks and coughing into the pit of your arm, and you know, some of those, you know, what we call MPIs, non-pharmaceutical interventions, that there is so much research on, they're not doing anymore because it's so categorical. If you get so complacent because of the screens, then they need to go. So it's, again, we need to look at the data, we need to look at the research, and that's where we need to focus our attention.
I suppose we sort of move away a little bit from COVID and from the sneezes and all that sort of stuff, maybe. Do you think, well, I mean, obviously it is. I mean, do you think the future workplace is going to change? I mean, there's lots and lots of talk about it, and at Workplace Trends, there was a lot of discussions about it on the online conference, and I know there's going to be more on their conference in October. I mean, how do you see, I mean, from the research that you've done over this year, as a result of the COVID and the lockdown situation and people working from home, maybe the office. I mean, I know I came to one of your, the Herman Miller Insight events that you did in, well, not yourself, but Herman Miller did in London. And it was about, you know, what's the future of the workplace? And I came up with a thing of like, okay, it's going to be no workplace, it's going to be thing, and it's going to be a venue. So it would be a thing that people will come in to brainstorm or whatever, but it'll be heavily branded, but it will be a venue for people to come together. And I was like, oh, that's quite cool. And I was like, yeah, but I mean, I don't know. I mean, how do you see, I mean, I think obviously there will always be a need to have an office because of certain companies needing telephones or whatever it is, or some kind of research or kind of communication together, different sort of brainstorming, maybe kind of creativity sessions. I mean, how do you see from the research that you've done right now? Obviously it's going to change probably in by the end of the year even, but how do you see the use of the workplace changing? Yeah,
I think for me it's about trends and fads, right? So when I was growing up, I had to have a pager. I had to have a pager, but the only person that had the number to that pager was my mum, but it was more of a status symbol, right? So it was really cool to have a pager. It was totally impractical, and I never really used it. And then that was demonstrated to become a fad, whereas the mobile phone later became the trend that's been long-standing ever since then. And I think a lot of these conversations that are happening with COVID is a knee-jerk reaction, and some of them will be demonstrated to be fads and others of which will demonstrate to be trends. So I think if we look at some of the research that was coming through before COVID even happened, then we can see that what might be perpetuated and excelled by COVID-19. So as an example, the amount of space that organizations used around the world their people, the consumption was ridiculous. They consumed far too much space. Their meeting rooms were typically too big, 3 times too big. They were giving desks and chairs to every employee, understanding that only 30% of the time were actually sat at a desk in a chair. And then you know, you've got these private offices that, like I said before, are unoccupied 77% of the time. So there was a lot of real estate that was being wasteful and underutilized. So that was the trend before COVID-19. And then if we look at this kind of remote working revolution that's happened, which in Europe is, you know, kind of pretty standard, but here in the Middle East and Africa is something that we've really struggled, because we struggle with kind of trust in this part of the world to a greater degree, at least what I found. So they typically don't allow employees to work from home, and then we've all had to go into lockdown. That trust has had to been implemented, and actually some surprising results has happened off the back of that. So I think that there will be a further reduction in the amount of real estate that we're consuming. I think also, you know, I hate the saying because everybody's using it, pardon me, this hub and spoke model that everyone's talking about as well, of having kind of a centralized hub for the organization, and then satellite offices, whether that's co-working or smaller versions of that HQ. I think that's really going to help, like, de-densify cities, because, you know, how much further can we continue to pack people onto public transportation and, you know, hike up the price of rent in those cities. So, you know, the only reason why that was happening is because organizations were stipulating that you had to come to the office. If you're allowed to work from home, then you typically work further out, you know, and then you come in for 1 or 2 days of the week. So I think we'll see a big reduction in the amount of real estate that organizations are consuming. Remote working will continue to rise, and it should have been rising at a greater rate beforehand, but the trust typically wasn't there. It differs in different pockets of the world, of course. And then, you know, the resources to be able to support working from home as well. So technology and also furniture. And again, that looks quite different depending on where you are in the world as well. I can say, you know, having my own dedicated space here is something that I'm trying to arrange right now. But if I was in Hong Kong or Singapore, I mean, that's just going to be an element inside my lounge, right? In the one bed or the studio apartment that I live in. So it very much depends on where you are in the world as to the impact that these trends could have. But I think that'll be the main one, is the using less real estate and de-densifying it, and more remote working and more flexible working arrangements as well. I'm really proud to say that my organization has started to look into maybe reducing the working week from 5 to 4 days, but elongating those hours by 2 per day. Looking at sabbaticals as well, between 6 to 12 weeks, unpaid, of course. Also, we are now able to stipulate which hours we'd like to work. So me as a new father, I'm up at 6 a.m. regardless of whether I want to be or not. So to start work at 9, you know, I would much rather, you know, start work at 8, finish a little early around the same time as my wife does, who's in teaching, and then we have some together time with our son at the end of the day, rather than a quick hour, you know, which involves feeding and bathing before he goes to bed. So flexibility, I think, is another one as well.
Well, congratulations on your newborn.
Thanks. Yeah.
Really lovely news.
It's been great. Lockdown's been fantastic for me, to be perfectly honest.
It's really nice. Just with that in mind, actually, how do you think the future, what do you reckon the workplace is going to look like when he reaches, you know, workplace age, as it were? Say he was going to go to work about sort of 21, 22. What do you think the workplace will look like?
Yeah. I used to travel quite a lot on my own. In fact, before my son was born, that year I did 138 days on the road. And I don't like to be that sad person that's always looking at like his phone and he's got the blue reflective light of Facebook on his face. So quite often when I'm going to dinner, I do what I call constructive eavesdropping, and I listen in on the conversations that's happening around me. And this is going back about 3 years ago now. There was a conversation on the table just next to me, and I could just about overhear what was being said. And it was a family, but the father was having a very atypical conversation with his son. But, you know, it could have quite easily been a mother with her daughter. And the father said to the son, "Son, what do you want to be when you grow up?" And the son said, "Daddy, I don't know what I want to be when I grow up." And he's like, "That's okay." And what he said next really astonished me. And I've been telling everybody about it since I heard. He said, "Son, that's okay because your job hasn't been created yet." And I think that is so true. And I think it's really difficult to hypothesize so far into the future. I mean, whenever we do research at Herman Miller, it's always 6 years into the future because that's the most realistic you can be, because of all the factors that are influencing, socioeconomic technology, that's a big one that just disrupts everything. So I think by the time that my son is old enough to enter the world of work, it will be a completely different world of work with many different professions that we haven't even computed now. It is impossible to say what it could look like. But I think as long as we focus on the functionality rather than the aesthetic, we'll still be in good stead. So focus on the needs of the employee when they come into the workplace, rather than just providing those same long rectangular boardrooms that were the first boardrooms 150 years ago, and we're still using them today for some strange reason. I hope that that's not the case in 20 years from now when he's old enough to enter the world of work. Presumably he's finished university. It might be earlier than that. It could be 16 when he enters the world of work.
So what in an ideal world, what would be your top 3 tips? What should workforces, employers and company directors and company owners be employing in an ideal world in the next few months? What should they be doing to make their workforce, their people, their humans, make it a better space for them, make it so that they're more creative, they're more focused, and that they want to come to work? So what would you suggest? What would be the top 3 things?
Yeah, so number 1, data infused design. Number 2 would be autonomy, which is one of the 6 fundamental human needs that we've identified that people are expecting when they come to work today. And then the 3rd one, I'm not just saying this because it's you, but I am a really true big believer in biophilia, specifically in the greenery and vegetation side of that. So, more plants. I think probably the best I've seen is Lendlease office in London, and they have a ratio of 6 plants to each person, which they admit probably still isn't enough plants. So if you compare yourself to Lendlease and realize that they're still not quite happy with their ratios, then you'll see how far that you have to go. But going back to number 1, data infused design, we can't just make decisions on intuition and previous experience because they haven't been served anyway. And now we have people's lives at stake. We really have to start to sample people. So some of the surveys that I recommend is the Leesman Index. 2 really interesting surveys you might be interested from them. One that looks at your real estate and how well that's performing based on the employee's point of view. The second one would be the work from home survey from the Leesman Index as well. So they're looking at what it's like being a remote employee. So the real estate one, they've been doing that for like nearly just over 10 years, I think. The work from home has been done during lockdown. But you could also compare that data with Gallup, who've been looking at pre-lockdown remote working stuff as well. And I would highly advise that everybody uses a Gallup survey with their employees just to figure out where you're missing the mark. And if it's the first time that you've done some surveys with your employees, brace yourself. It's not going to be great. But the thing is that being human, we naturally want to improve once we've measured something. So the first time you measure it, yeah, it's probably not going to be great. But thereafter, you know where you need to focus your energy on. Better than just kind of burying your head in the sand and hoping for the best, because your talent will leave you. Data infused design, leverage those resources, leverage us at Herman Miller. We've got a fantastic amount of data that we've collected over the last, over 100 years of business to figure out what makes people productive in terms of the furniture that you're supplying for them. And we can give you that information for free. It's no bother, no skin off my nose. That's really what I'm employed to do. So reach out to us, and we're quite happy to hand the data off to you that you're really interested in. So whether that's creativity, whether it's happiness, whether it's your personality profile, whether it's the 6 fundamental human needs, what motivates you in work that I referenced earlier, we can hand that over to you, pretty easily. And then autonomy. Autonomy, if you really break it down, is just, as William Wallace said, freedom. So everybody wants freedom, and we've had it. And well, to a degree, we've had it. We've been working from home, which for some is freedom. For others, you are now even more caged with your spouse and your children. When we come out of this lockdown, don't forget all the good lessons that we've learned during it, because there is a silver lining to this cloud, is that we can trust our employees, and that has been demonstrated in every organization for the most part, that you can trust them. And then so just allow them to work where works for them. For a long time, work has been a thing that you do, not a place that you go, but we've been forcing employees to go to places. And if you really want to make a great environment, it'd be somewhere that people who aren't compelled would naturally turn up to. So I constantly challenge my clients and ask them the question that if your office tomorrow was to turn into a co-working facility, how many of your employees would pay for the privilege of using your office? At which they kind of look at me and go, well, probably nobody, Ollie. And I said, well, therein lies the problem, right? So you're just mandating that people come into the office, and you're not providing environments that they would, want to show their wife and kids to in the weekend. Look what a cool place mummy and daddy work, right? So I think that's a really a big element as well, giving people autonomy to choose, and then creating an environment that's so compelling that they want to come in, and then balance that remote working with the physical office and co-working and those satellite hubs as well.
Thank you for listening to the Journal of Biophilic Design podcast.